Lectori Benevolo. I am distressed for thee, my brother. 2 Samuel 1:26. On account of its somewhat unusual content, my little book requires a short preface. I beg of you, dear reader, not to overlook it. For in what follows, I shall speak of the venerable objects of religious belief. Whoever talks of such matters inevitably runs the risk of being torn to pieces by the two parties who are in mortal conflict about those very things. This conflict is due to the strange supposition that a thing is true only if it presents itself as a physical fact. Thus, some people believe it to be physically true that Christ was born as the son of a virgin, while others deny this as a physical impossibility. Everyone can see that there is no logical solution to this conflict, and that one would do better not to get involved in such sterile disputes. Both are right and both are wrong. Yet they could easily reach agreement if only they dropped the word physical. Physical is not the only criterion of truth. There are also psychic truths, which can neither be explained nor proved nor contested in any physical way. If, for instance, a general belief existed that the river Rhine had at one time flowed backwards from its mouth to its source, then this belief would in itself be a fact, even though such an assertion, physically understood, would be deemed utterly incredible. Beliefs of this kind are psychic facts, which cannot be contested and need no proof. Religious statements are of this type. They refer without exception to things that cannot be established as physical facts. If they did not do this, they would inevitably fall into the category of the natural sciences. Taken as referring to anything physical, they make no sense whatever, and science would dismiss them as non-experienceable. They would be mere miracles, which are sufficiently exposed to doubt as it is, and yet they could not demonstrate the reality of the spirit or meaning that underlies them, because meaning is something that always demonstrates itself and is experienced on its own merits. The spirit and meaning of Christ are present and perceptible to us even without the aid of miracles. Miracles appeal only to the understanding of those who cannot perceive the meaning. They are mere substitutes for the not understood reality of the spirit. This is not to say that the living presence of the Spirit is not occasionally accompanied by marvelous physical happenings. I only wish to emphasize that these happenings can neither replace nor bring about an understanding of the Spirit, which is the one essential thing. The fact that religious statements frequently conflict with the observed physical phenomena proves that, in contrast to physical perception, the spirit is autonomous, and that psychic experience is to a certain extent independent of physical data. The psyche is an autonomous factor, and religious statements are psychic confessions, which in the last resort are based on unconscious, i.e., on transcendental processes. These processes are not accessible to physical perception, but demonstrate their existence through the confessions of the psyche. The resultant statements are filtered through the medium of human consciousness. That is to say, they are given visible forms, which in their turn are subject to manifold influences from within and without. That is why, whenever we speak of religious contents, we move in a world of images that point to something ineffable. We do not know how clear or unclear these images, metaphors, and concepts are in respect of their transcendental object. If, for instance, we say God, we give expression to an image or verbal concept which has undergone many changes in the course of time. We are, however, unable to say with any degree of certainty, unless it be by faith, whether these changes affect only the images and concepts or the unspeakable itself. After all, we can imagine God as an eternally flowing current of vital energy that endlessly changes shape just as easily as we can imagine him as an eternally unmoved, unchangeable essence. Our reason is sure only of one thing, that it manipulates images and ideas which are dependent on human imagination and its temporal and local conditions, and which have therefore changed innumerable times in the course of their long history. There is no doubt that there is something behind these images that transcends consciousness and operates in such a way that the statements do not vary limitlessly and chaotically, but clearly all relate to a few basic principles or archetypes. These, like the psyche itself, or like matter, are unknowable as such. All we can do is to construct models of them which we know to be inadequate, a fact which is confirmed again and again by religious statements. If, therefore, in what follows I concern myself with these metaphysical objects, I am quite conscious that I am moving in a world of images and that none of my reflections touches the essence of the unknowable. I am also too well aware of how limited are our powers of conception, to say nothing of the feebleness and poverty of language, to imagine that my remarks mean anything more in principle than what a primitive man means when he conceives of his God as a hare or a snake. But although our whole world of religious ideas consists of anthropomorphic images that could never stand up to rational criticism, we should never forget that they are based on numinous archetypes, i.e., on an emotional foundation which is unassailable by reason. We are dealing with psychic facts which logic can overlook but not eliminate. In this connection, Tertullian has already appealed quite rightly to the testimony of the soul. In his De Testimonio Animae, he says, "These testimonies of the soul are as simple as they are true, as obvious as they are simple, as common as they are obvious, as natural as they are common, as divine as they are natural. I think that they cannot appear to anyone to be trifling and ridiculous if he considers the majesty of nature, whence the authority of the soul is derived. What you allow to the mistress, you will assign to the disciple. Nature is the mistress. The soul is the disciple. What the one has taught, or the other has learned, has been delivered to them by God, who is in truth the master even of the mistress herself. What notion the soul is able to conceive of her first teacher is in your power to judge from that soul which is in you. Feel that which causes you to feel. Think upon that which is in forebodings your prophet, in omens your augur, in the events which befall you your foreseer. Strange if, being given by God, she knows how to act the diviner for men. Equally strange if she knows him by whom she has been given. I would go a step further and say that the statements made in the Holy Scriptures are also utterances of the soul, even at the risk of being suspected of psychologism. The statements of the conscious mind may easily be snares and delusions, lies or arbitrary opinions, but this is certainly not true of the statements of the soul. To begin with, they always go over our heads because they point to realities that transcend consciousness. These entia are the archetypes of the collective unconscious, and they precipitate complexes of ideas in the form of mythological motifs. Ideas of this kind are never invented, but enter the field of inner perception as finished products, for instance in dreams. They are spontaneous phenomena which are not subject to our will, and we are therefore justified in ascribing to them a certain autonomy. They are to be regarded not only as objects, but as subjects with laws of their own. From the point of view of consciousness, we can, of course, describe them as objects, and even explain them up to a point in the same measure as we can describe and explain a living human being. But then we have to disregard their autonomy. If that is considered, we are compelled to treat them as subjects. In other words, we have to admit that they possess spontaneity and purposiveness, or a kind of consciousness and free will. We observe their behavior and consider their statements. This dual standpoint, which we are forced to adopt towards every relatively independent organism, naturally has a dual result. On the one hand, it tells me what I do to the object, and on the other hand, what it does, possibly to me. It is obvious that this unavoidable dualism will create a certain amount of confusion in the minds of my readers, particularly as in what follows we shall have to do with the archetype of deity. Should any of my readers feel tempted to add an apologetic only to the God images as we perceive them, he would immediately fall foul of experience, which demonstrates beyond any shadow of doubt the extraordinary numinosity of these images, the tremendous effectiveness, mana, of these images is such that they not only give one the feeling of pointing to the ens realissimum, but make one convinced that they actually express it and establish it as a fact. This makes discussion uncommonly difficult, if not impossible. It is, in fact, impossible to demonstrate God's reality to oneself except by using images which have arisen spontaneously or are sanctified by tradition, and whose psychic nature and affects the naive-minded person has never separated from their unknowable metaphysical background. He instantly equates the effective image with the transcendental X to which it points. The seeming justification for this procedure appears self-evident and is not considered a problem so long as the statements of religion are not seriously questioned. But if there is occasion for criticism, then it must be remembered that the image and the statement are psychic processes which are different from their transcendental object. They do not posit it, they merely point to it. In the realm of psychic processes, criticism and discussion are not only permissible, but are unavoidable. In what follows, I shall attempt just such a discussion, such a coming to terms with certain religious traditions and ideas. Since I shall be dealing with numinous factors, my feeling is challenged quite as much as my intellect. I cannot therefore write in a coolly objective manner, but must allow my emotional subjectivity to speak if I want to describe what I feel when I read certain books of the Bible, or when I remember the impressions I have received from the doctrines of our faith. I do not write as a biblical scholar, which I am not, but as a layman and physician who has been privileged to see deeply into the psychic life of many people. What I am expressing is first of all my own personal view, but I know that I also speak in the name of many who have had similar experiences